All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to City Hall here in the City of Hollywood. Today is October 22nd, 2025. We are here, of course, for a City Commission workshop on the subject of the city's septic to sewer program. Certainly a priority that the City Commission and the administration have been working on for many years, and following some legislative action at the state level that we pursued, and the initiative of the City Commission and administration to really start addressing this issue that's important environmentally and also benefits our property owners in many ways, to help convert the city's legacy septic systems ultimately in the future to a full sewer and treated wastewater program. And so I know the City Commission's very eager to get through this workshop and make some decisions and provide some direction so that ultimately we can have some items come to the City Commission for resolutions and action. And so with that, I'd like to invite our city manager to begin the workshop.
Thank you, Mayor, Vice Mayor, Commissioners, and to all the members of the public and staff in attendance. Well, that pretty much captures it. Literally for decades, this issue has been in the making and has had efforts in the past to move forward, but now we're really moving forward. And so the presentation and the information today is fairly extensive. We'll move it through as quickly as possible. If it's possible to kind of get that in a chunk of information and its continuity and save questions and answers for the end, promise there'll be plenty of time for that. It's literally one of the driving forces, along with the whole stormwater issue, infrastructure, some of the city's finances. Those handful of issues are the issues that are turning the city around and driving it for the next generation. So this will be a major issue, and of course a big price tag attached to it as well. The benefits, as you mentioned, Mayor, in terms of people with their property values, environmental issues, economic development, the help with commercial corridors, very, very important. So with that, I'll turn it over to Vin, and then our consultants will be able to go through some of the details for you. Thank you. Yep.
Good morning. Vin Morello, Department of Utilities. Thank you for this opportunity to present the material in this workshop. I want to thank our partners that have worked so hard on the presentation, Hazen and Sawyer, Arcadis, Stantec, and Brazaga, that have put a lot of work into this presentation. And the other day I had the opportunity to see the CMED's time capsule, and I reflected that in many ways, actually the optimum way, the infrastructure we're contemplating today is the quintessential time capsule. This will be the foundation, as George said, for the next generation. And so very pleased to be part of that effort this day. The septic to sewer program is a subset of the overall water and wastewater master plan. And although we're focusing on the septic to sewer program, the rates discussed today capture the entire water and wastewater master plan. We've had the opportunity, we're having both plans in hand, to overlay all of the proposed infrastructure projects onto the GIS system in order to prioritize the septic to sewer basins. And in doing so, we've been able to program out at a high level, for your consideration, a multi-phase approach over the next 30 years. So principally, it's a $2.5 billion water and wastewater program. 1.3 billion of that is the sanitary sewer portion of the septic to sewer program, and another 200 million rather, is in the water mains, which are, so the whole program is also coordinated, although stormwater is not shown on this table, is also coordinated with the stormwater program. The intent being that we would go into an area, handle all of the utilities at once so to minimize disruption and come out with a finished project and not having recurring excavations in the same area. We looked at, not now knowing the cost of the programming, having updated it, and we'll address that in the presentation. We looked at stretching out the program over different periods of years. Fort Lauderdale, using Fort Lauderdale as a benchmark, they addressed 14,000 properties, and they did their program between 2004 and 2011. They had no other competing projects. They didn't have a consent order. They didn't have any other master plans going on. So they were able to do it relatively aggressively. And back then, of course, at a much lower cost. So they were able to accomplish their 14,000 property program in 7 years. We have 17,000 properties, and we looked at a 10-year, 20, 30-year, and 40-year program. And for the intensive analysis, we did the financial analysis for 30 years and back. So, although the rest of this presentation will be kind of centered on a 30-year program, because the evaluation looked like that was the least aggressive water and rate to impose on the public. We have a detailed analysis for the 25, 20, and 15 and 10-year programs, should this commission want to look into those in further detail. So the objectives of today, similar to how we structured the stormwater workshop, is we're going to try to reach a consensus, or I'm going to try to ascertain a consensus from the commission on to adopt the water and wastewater master plans. That's fairly straightforward, and the benefit of that is that from time to time, we'll come to the commission with state revolving fund loan applications, and a companion reso with that will be to update the facilities plan and we have to do that because we do not have an adopted water and wastewater master plan. So in adopting it, it allows us to save a reso going forward and just shows the state that we have a cohesive plan. Secondly, a consensus to adopt the septic to sewer program. That would be the multi-phase. That would be, we're going to present to you 6 phases of work and show you the areas that will be working in each phase and a relative time scale, and just looking for a general acceptance of that proposed program, which is driven by the prioritized water main replacement that was done in the water master plan. And then consensus on the funding level and fee structure. We've a lot of work went into getting House Bill 1123 passed, thanks to Adam Reichbeck and Phyllis Shaw in the city attorney's office and outside counsel, and that's making all of this possible. So the way that law is written, it's a conventional funding built into the water and wastewater structure. That's what we'll be presenting. We also have a flat fee structure that we were asked to look into, and we have some discussion about that, and just to get some general feedback on that. And just to note, when they're not tied together, we can proceed with the conventional water and wastewater rate structure and then adopt a flat fee at any point in time later as a separate kind of rider. And then finally, a consensus on the application of the sewer ordinance. We have in hand a sewer ordinance that compels properties that have sewer service made available to them to connect within 90 days or face $250 fines. To date, for whatever reason, that ordinance and those fines have not been applied. So we're just looking for feedback to basically apply the ordinance so that we can compel the properties that have sewer service made available to sign up and complete the program. So with that, I'm going to introduce Phil Cook from Hazen and Sawyer. He's going to take the rest of the presentation. It's about 80 slides. We timed it yesterday. We can get through it in about 50 minutes. But we have plenty of time for questions. We worked in the ability to ask questions during it, and so please feel free to ask questions. Just to forewarn you of the length.
So just to clarify, Vin, in your presentation, you have sort of stops along the way for specific question and answers at certain segments, or do you want us to interrupt?
Just, I'd say, just ask questions as they come to
Yeah?
you. And
Okay.
if there are more detailed discussions, maybe we can go to table it and move on and connect.
All right, we'll try to keep the questions and the back and forth brief just to get the answers. But if the commissioners want to ask a question midway, just go ahead and activate your microphone and go for it. And if for some reason we're getting into a group discussion, then I'll moderate. But otherwise, just activate and interrupt the speaker. Thanks.
Okay, and I just wanted to thank the DPU staff and the CMO for supporting the effort into this work.
Good morning. Welcome to the Septic to Sewer Program Workshop. The Department of Public Utilities has two strategic goals, the first of which is a citywide stormwater system. That was the subject of a previous workshop, and that effort is already underway. The other is a citywide sewer system, and that's what brings us here today for this workshop. And I would mention that the city efforts regarding House Bill 1123 mentioned earlier are going to be instrumental in the funding of this sewer expansion. Vin talked about the objective today. The overall objective is one of consensus. Consensus for the water and the wastewater master plans, the septic to sewer program itself, the funding level and the fee structure associated with it, and consensus on the application of the existing sewer ordinance. We have a lot of information to cover today, as was already mentioned, so we've broken it up into several elements. We're going to walk through the history of the city's sewer infrastructure, how we got to where we are today. Then we're going to look at an overview, a brief overview of the septic systems as they operate. And then we'll look at the proposed expansion strategy, what this program is really all about. And then Eric will take us through project funding, and Alec will take us through the recent expansion efforts that have been worked on by the city. And then we'll move into what are the next steps to wrap up this presentation. So for the history of the infrastructure here in Hollywood, it really begins where it began for much of the nation. Back in 1972, with the passage of the Clean Water Act, the federal government set standards for treatment and disposal of wastewater. And at that time, the federal government funded 75% of the effort, and the city and the local governments were responsible for the remaining 25%. This was critical for the development of the program here, and in 1978, Broward County drafted a facilities plan which laid out Hollywood as the lead agency for what is known as the Southern Region. That Southern Region is the wastewater treatment plant here at Hollywood, along with the large users that contribute to that, which are Hallandale, Dania, unincorporated Broward County, Pembroke Park, Pembroke Pines, Miramar, as well as effluent, treated effluent from the city of Cooper City and the town of Davie. It also was key to development of the expansion of the sewer system here, as it were, back in the 70s. We look at the history in Hollywood. The 50s, 60s, and 70s are when the predominant era of the development of sewer systems out in the area. The 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, and 2010s saw some limited expansion, but about 80% of your system is between 50 and 70 years old, which leaves us with about 44% of the city remaining unsewered. Shown here in the tan highlighting are the unsewered areas. It amounts to about 17,000 accounts. And those accounts use what are known as on-site sewage treatment and disposal systems, or better known colloquially as septic tanks. What is a septic tank? It's essentially a large tank underground which receives the sewage from the property. It separates solids from floatables and allows the liquid to pass through to a drain field where it percolates down through the soil. That area is known as a treatment zone, and there is bacteria that grows there and takes care of consuming the organic material in that liquid. And the treatment zone is important for South Florida in particular because we have a high groundwater table. And the Florida Administrative Code requires about 2 feet for that treatment zone. But you can imagine as that groundwater table comes up, we can certainly compromise that system, or if it comes up high enough, in the case of potential flooding, it can fail altogether. So this makes the elimination of these septic tanks a priority for the city. We want to protect our local groundwaters. That's where we get our drinking water. We want to protect those well fields. We want to protect the surface waters. We want to protect against floods due to climate change or impacts to those septic systems that are in existence. So we have developed a sewer expansion strategy, and it's going to have some challenges. And we're going to go through each of these challenges as we move on, but the first of which is construction impacts. It's going to require digging up the streets in every neighborhood that's unsewered. That's number one. Number two, the additional sewage that's going to come into the plant, we have to make sure that the plant has capacity for that sewage. Public acceptance is also a key element. We definitely want to get the public involved and get their input, as well as probably one of the most important is funding. We have estimated that the system expansion is going to cost some $1.3 billion, so funding is going to be a key element as well. So when we look at those unsewered areas and we look at the other utility work that is needed in the area that we now know of and has been identified, we recognize that combining all of this work would be an important aspect of any expansion. What we're showing here in the blue lines are the water mains that need replacement. Those were identified in the Water Master Plan. You can see the orange lines are actually sewer force mains that run through some of the unsewered areas. Those also need to be upgraded or installed, as well as the stormwater elements of the whole program. The stormwater is shown here in yellow, in red, and in the blue shading, depending on whether they're renewal and replacement or part of the CIP or the interim projects. So we want to address all of that at the same time when we go into an area. Ben had mentioned City of Fort Lauderdale.
Can we go back to that slide for
We
1
sure
second?
can.
I noticed that most of the area south of Hollywood Boulevard, east of 95, it's not shaded in blue. Does that mean because we don't have any flooding issue when it comes to there? Because the residents that live in that area will disagree with you.
Those blue shaded areas are showing that first tranche of the stormwater program. It's not showing the entire stormwater program.
Well,
Yeah.
Proposed approach combines expansion with other areas utility work. It doesn't say anything about one versus the other, but we'll move on. I'll wait to hear the rest of it.
So we mentioned previously the City of Fort Lauderdale undertook what was called the Waterworks 2011 program. That addressed some 14,000 properties. And as Vin mentioned, it was a comprehensive program on their part. It was very aggressive over a period of about 7 years. And we're looking to do something similar, but at a less aggressive pace. Looking at the Fort Lauderdale program, some of the lessons learned were, number one, maintain a hydraulic model to evaluate the system capacity so that you can satisfy the regulatory requirements as you undergo the sewer expansion. The City of Hollywood has a comprehensive hydraulic model that was developed as part of the wastewater master plan. So that has been completed. Also, coordination of the septic to sewer conversions with the other area utility work. That's what we've mentioned, and that's kind of at the heart of this program and part of the reason behind the prioritization that we're presenting today. So that is in progress, and that's what we're presenting. As well, a development of qualified contractors to rotate through the utility bid contracts. That will help reduce price and keep projects moving. And the city will then also have the opportunity to provide property owners with a list of pre-approved plumbers. There is going to be some work and some effort on the part of the homeowner as part of this program. We'll get into that later, but this is an important aspect of that, as well as the potential for the city to pre-negotiate with plumbers some of these unit prices. Make it easy on the homeowner to connect when the time comes. Looking at a payment plan for the connection fees, also to help the homeowner make that connection. And of course, engage all of the affected residents in the overall program and encourage their input. So again, looking at the proposed approach, we want to address the unsewered areas and expand them in tune with the work that's identified in the water and the wastewater master plans, as well as the stormwater master plan. We talked a little bit about how long the city has been looking at addressing the sewer expansion. So I want to make a point about what's proposed today. It differs from the past efforts in two important ways. One is the stormwater, the water, and the wastewater master plans. Those have been produced, and they have identified and quantified the amount of work that needs to be done in the overall system. And this is key to the wastewater system in particular because there's been a lot of deferred maintenance at the wastewater plant. So you're going to see in the very early years of this program a focus on getting the plant up to snuff so it can take that additional sewage from the residents as we expand. As well, we have looked at the cost of this system expansion, and it's estimated to be $1.3 billion, which gets us to the 30-year effort that we're looking at taking on. This differs from the more recent effort in 2020 that was done, which was prioritizing as a standalone program the expansion of the sewer system. So at that time, we did not have the benefit of the stormwater master plan, the water master plan, or the wastewater master plan. It was strictly an effort that was focused on some weighted metrics dealing with the groundwater table and its elevation, the well field proximity to that basin, the proximity of that basin to water bodies around the city, the cost per account, the FEMA flood zone designation of the area, as well as septic tank repair metrics from the health department. We also did not have the benefit of House Bill 1123, which has been passed and signed into law. So there was not sewer revenue available for it at the time. As well, a formal rate study was not done to undertake that program. And that differed from the effort in 2019, which brings up the second important point, which is in 2019, it was a 10-year program estimated at $400 million. We have seen the costs change quite a bit since then. And one element of this, or a good example of this, is the Lawn Acres and Washington Park project. So that was estimated in 2018 at $14.6 million. And after COVID, the project was undertaken and bid out, but it was bid out as Washington Park only. And Washington Park only amounted to about 43% of the original project. When the bids came in for that project, and we got two bids, it came in at twice the cost, $27 million. So half the project, or less than half the project, cost twice as much as the original estimate. That changed our sense of the overall program, and we'll hear more about that today. So that project has been completed, and those costs were what we are expecting. And I can tell you from our firm's standpoint, we're seeing that all over. We're seeing it in Orlando, we're seeing it all the way up to Jacksonville and down in Miami-Dade. So it's not just here in Hollywood.
Real quick question about that. So what is bringing about that additional cost? Because the work type hasn't changed, the materials haven't changed, dig the trench, put in the pipe. So where are the contractors driving up the prices?
Well, I think what is driving up the price is a couple of things. Number one, if you remember the crash back in 07, 08, a lot of utilities deferred, in fact, a lot of cities deferred maintenance that was needed. It's taken about a decade for that to start rolling. COVID kind of paused it a bit, But COVID had the added impact of some supply chain issues, which we're still seeing. If you want a good-sized generator or some particular technical equipment, we're seeing wait times, lead times for that equipment of over a year. So some of these projects are being expanded quite a lot. There's a lot of work out there, so we're seeing few bidders, like the Washington Park project, where you got 2 bidders. That's not a lot of competition. The crews here doing this kind of work, they're highly specialized, they're very well paid, but they're very busy.
So basically, you're saying that there's a lack of competition and the contractors are charging accordingly, knowing that there's not competition and they're basically charging more for what they used to decades ago charge less for. That's a big aspect of it, right?
That's an aspect that it's costing them more, and the crews, not just the materials, but the crews are costing them more. The crews are expensive because they have the leverage now,
Yep.
so they're also very well paid.
Yeah, I mean, I've had conversation with the city manager. I know we've talked about at what point in a $1.3 billion endeavor, and maybe even we can throw stormwater into that, do the market forces that are just basically, are not enough market supply to provide, the service we're looking for at a reasonable rate, not enough competition. At what point does it tilt the scale and compel the city to look at running the operation ourselves, hiring the requisite people? We can hire all that we need, get the engineers on the outside to design what we need to design, buy the equipment, and run these public works projects internally with a set of employees and crews that we don't have today, but that we might want to do. And I know that in your presentation you might show that scenario, and if it's not fully developed yet, to really look at cost of doing it ourselves versus doing business in the market that you're saying is limited with hardly any competition. We're at the behest and schedule of available companies in South Florida, and while this might attract bidders from outside the state and other parts of the state, I'm really, one of my big things, and I mentioned to the city manager yesterday, is to really study at what point does it make sense for us to do it internally, because we're talking $2-3 billion of water and stormwater and wastewater. Those are billions, and imagine what big an operation we can run ourselves if that were the budget or half of that, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So whether you want to address it now or later in the presentation, it has to be a big issue for us to really think about.
We did take a brief look at that, and we've talked to some contractors, and there definitely is a competition for the experienced crews, for sure. But we do have some slides later that we can present on that.
Yeah, Mayor, I believe the state statute 255.20 for larger projects has to be something that's of a competitive nature. It restricts the cities about how much they can actually do. Up anything over $300,000, it restricts the municipalities from doing so.
Hard from state statute to do it internally?
Yes, sir.
All right, well, city attorney, what statute is that, Peter?
255.20.
All right, so city attorney, and I don't know if the presenters had looked into that and want to speak to that later, but if that's the case, then
I will definitely look into
okay.
that. Thank you.
So I don't know if I mean, it's interesting to think about building a crew, especially since it's not a 2 or 3 year or 5 year program. I'm gonna live with a 10-year program, but we'll get into that later. I like the better idea of trying to attract out-of-state companies to come and do projects here. But then they're relocating employees and stuff like that. So I don't know if that would make financial sense. But Hayes and Sawyer is a national company, international company.
Yes.
Have you reached out to other offices throughout the country to see if they're bidding out work cheaper, that we might be able to go to different markets and attract some of those companies that want to expand nationwide to take on a different market?
We have, and we have seen some contractors try and come in here. What we have seen come in that we haven't seen before are contractors from the other side of the state. mainly from the west coast of Florida. As you had mentioned, it is difficult to move here. We've had difficulty hiring engineers and getting them to move here as well. So that is one thing. But overall, we are seeing the costs go up all over the nation, all of our projects. We've had difficulty in really quantifying cost estimates to the current market because it does vary so much in individual cities.
All right. I'll save the rest of my questions for later. Thank you.
Okay. So what we have proposed is a 30-year program. It's spread out over 6 phases. Phase 1 would begin in the Boulevard Heights area, as well as the area known as UEO3A, just west of Dixie Highway. I'm having trouble seeing the numbers. This would address some 1,100 properties over the first 5 years for about $71 million. I'm sorry? The properties would be that Boulevard Heights area over there, UW07 and UEO3A. And it would also address some of the water infrastructure in the vicinity of those areas to the tune of about $17 million. Moving into phase 2 in 2032, here we're addressing, again, a lot of the infrastructure at the wastewater plants. Some 2,000 properties for about $160 million, with additional infrastructure in the area amounting to about $50 million. Here we're addressing the area just east of Carriage Hills, as well as UEO3B, which is the area just east of I-95 corridor. In phase 3, we move to Hollywood Hills and some of the 441 corridor, another 3,600 properties for $300 million. And again, now a good chunk of the water and wastewater work at the plants has been taken care of, and we're able to shift more of the funds to the septic to sewer program. Also addressing another $30 million in water infrastructure in those areas.
So obviously our city is 30 square miles and our treatment plant is located where it is, probably because it was coastal release
For the outfall.
outfall, right? The outfall driven system. And obviously we're looking at water tables and things. And while we do have the treatment plant there, obviously it's not going anywhere. We've recently invested over $100 million in the deep injection wells over there, and the plants are not cheap to create themselves. But did we at all consider whether, and I don't know if a lot of the cost or the infrastructure could be to, force the sewage to the treatment plant from the western areas, or if that already exists and there's not much to do. But my question is, did you all contemplate, and is it at all worth contemplating the idea of constructing a second treatment plant out west that treats, the customers out west? Is that a benefit to the system? Did you all think about that? Any feedback on that?
Yeah, we have in the past, and to start a system from scratch, a plant from scratch, is much more expensive than just adding on to an existing plant. I want to say it was back with Albert Perez when he was the utilities director. We did look at what we call a scavenging plant that was right near the turnpike near Sheridan Street. And the cost just did not pan out versus putting in a pipeline and a pump station and the energy to send it to the east.
All right. Thanks.
Moving into phase 4, we address more of the Driftwood area as well as the area north of Hollywood Boulevard. Another 3,000 properties for a cost of $250 million. and another $54 million in infrastructure in the area. Phase 5, addressing the majority of Hollywood Hills and the Driftwood area, as well as UEO2 and Highland Park area. $250 million for another 3,600 properties and another $44 million in other water and wastewater projects in the area.
Did you, through these dollar figures, come up with a average cost per customer? Like, I'm dividing 250 million by 3,579 in the Hollywood Hills example, and comes out to $70,000, per house. Did you all use that a figure per household as a figure to get to these dollars, or how did you?
We were looking at individual areas, whether they could be tied into some of the existing infrastructure that's already there, some of those pump stations, versus new pump stations putting in the force main. So yeah, we did look at that, and we do address that in another couple of slides on a per account basis.
May I ask a question? I'm sorry. So looking back at the 2019 projected 400 million to cover the entire city, and now we're looking at
About 3 times.
3 times that amount, what's to say that in 2035 or 2040, when we're still almost 20 years out of completion, that these prices don't increase 3 times? Is there a guarantee of a locked rate? And so this, to me, is like pie in the sky numbers because of the fact that we've seen this huge increase from 2019 till now. Just the way things seem to be flowing, that they will definitely be quadrupled what they are today. Have we considered that in any of these estimates?
We have not. I think what we're looking at today and trying to get the consensus on is the first 5 years. I'm a homeowner, costs do go up. They seem to only go up. If one of the true reasons really was the crash in 07, 08, and we're kind of looking at the amount of work kind of being, moving through the snake, as it were, that hump moving through, maybe the costs will come down. If the costs continue to come up, then I think the mayor would probably be correct, and that other firms would want to move into the area and take advantage of that pricing.
Well, I think this is an opportunity for City of Hollywood to be the first to make that happen. Thanks.
I just do want to say that I took a look at that statute, and while it does say that jobs over 300,000 need to be competitively awarded, it doesn't mean that we can't do work ourselves. But if we do look to use outside contractors, then it has to be competitively bid. But it doesn't mean we can't do it ourselves, just to clarify.
I agree, Mayor.
Right?
I also took a look at the statute in the time since you brought it forward to my attention. Thank you very much, Commissioner. And there is a subsection that provides that the governing body of the local government may vote to take that work in-house if they so desired, following certain procedures.
So we are looking at a 5-year rate increase on this, and that's what's going to be captured as we go through this program. So phase 6 would be the last phase, finishing up Highland Gardens, Beverly Park, a little bit of Boulevard Heights, and the remaining area in the 441 corridor. The last 3,500 properties, or 3,400, $266 million, with another nothing estimated out in the system, because we've taken care of everything and prioritized all of those areas first. So compared to Fort Lauderdale, obviously we're not as aggressive. A 30-year program is much more spread out than the 7-year program that they undertook. It would expand the infrastructure in the city. First, of course, bringing the sewer accounts up to the level of water accounts to some 39,000, adding about 70 to 80% in gravity sewer and lift stations in the area. A lot more infrastructure. So in summary, the total of 17,000 accounts over that 30-year period at the estimated cost of $1.3 billion, with another $200 million of infrastructure needs in that area, and then the $1 billion worth of infrastructure needs at the plant and in the sewered areas, for a total program of $2.5 billion.
The dollar amount there that you have for other than sewer expansion, water, wastewater, remaining CIP projects, are those limited to those 17,000 homes?
No, those are outside of the 17,000 homes. So the water, wastewater CIP projects, those we took out so you can see just what was for the sewer expansion and then the infrastructure in the sewer expansion areas. The CIP projects are all other work, which is work that needs to be done in the sewered areas, as well as that work we talked about at the plant, that first almost $700 million.
So to the mayor's point, it makes sense to take the 1.3 billion dividing by 17,000, but not the total number. If you're looking at a per household cost, it only makes sense with respect to the sewer expansion.
Correct.
Thank
Correct. So turning to capacity, the capacity at the wastewater plant here in the city is rated at 55.5 million gallons per day. Hollywood has reserved 21.8 million gallons of that 55.5 million gallons. So we need to be cognizant of what is this additional flow going to do at the wastewater plant. Historically, the city has averaged about 16 million gallons a day. That was through 2022. And as part of this effort, we looked at what are your flows going on now, and what we've seen in 2023, 24, and 25 to date is a marked increase in that sewer flow, a little over 20 million gallons a day. If we consider those 17,000 connections, we're looking at about...
Hold on, how could that be? And is it because of the storm events that we had, days where a significant amount of storm water, we think, infiltrated the sewer system?
That certainly could be one. We're looking into this because it is such a large increase. I know there has been added infrastructure, added homes and residents in the city and apartments, but it is an enormous amount of increase.
Definitely not, because of additional units, which have been at the rate of less than 1% per year. So it would be good to understand that, Vin and company. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, we are looking into that. It's scary, honestly. So the 17,000 connections we estimate would be about another 6 million gallons per day, which would exceed that 21.8 million gallons per day of reserve capacity at the plant. And based on the progression of the proposed program, it would exceed it before the year 2035. Now, you brought up infiltration and inflow, and what that is, and infiltration is water from the ground getting into the pipes, because all these pipes are buried. And as we mentioned before, they're 50 to 70 years old. So any cracks, any leaks in there, with our high groundwater table, you're not going to leak out, you're going to leak in, and that groundwater is going to leak into the sewer system. So essentially clean water is having to be treated because it's been captured. Inflow is a wet weather event, and that is from poor connections, either someone leaving their clean out cap off in their yard to drain their yard or drain the nearby area, a misconnection between the house gutter and the sewer system itself, And oftentimes we can see cross connections between the stormwater system connected directly to the sewer system. We can address that through a comprehensive program, and the city has already undertaken that and completed phase 1 of that, ready to begin phase 2 shortly. That comprehensive program can remove about 50% of the I&I. You're not going to be able to get rid of all of it with a 50, 70-year-old system. But what we've seen in comprehensive efforts in the areas down here in South Florida is you're able to get about half of that out.
The question to you or Vin, do we know what percentage of our I&I is inflow from stormwater sitting on top of the manholes and just draining in versus infiltration of pipes? I know we did some camera work over the years, but do we know what percentage that is?
Well, what hurts worse is the infiltration, and that we see day in and day out. It even increases when the tides come up. But yes, we do have an estimate of what the wet weather inflow is. That usually lasts for about a week as it works its way through. That one is tricky, though, because that wet weather, those extreme events, raise the groundwater elevation quite a bit. So then it's wet weather, but it becomes infiltration.
All right.
So we have estimated about 8 million gallons a day of that initial historic 16 million is I&I. So if we were able to remove with a comprehensive program half of that, we could extend the capacity at the plant for the city's reserve capacity to about the year 2060 and complete the program.
Fix I&I. I mean, obviously you want to do that, but upgrading the plant, add capacity, what's the
Upgrading the plant is almost always more expensive. If you have to start pouring concrete at the plant, that's more expensive. The reason we stop at about 50% of the I&I is just that. As we look at what repairs are needed, we put a cost to those, and eventually it gets too expensive to undertake that repair until it gets worse to the point where you may as well go in and repair it. So we do leave identified needed or not needed, but we do identify repairs that could be done, but we don't necessarily do them all because they're just not cost effective.
I have a couple questions here. One is just a broad question that I was going to save to the end, but now might be a good time to talk about it, and that is emerging technologies. Are there things on the horizon that you can talk about, whether it's by 2060? I mean, just a simple thing, a low-flow toilet, things like that didn't exist 50 years ago and now exist. Are there things that you see coming down the pike that are going to save us from ourselves in 2060?
Well, I think what has been done with low flow shower heads and toilets and that kind of thing has been done. Certainly, if you can reduce the amount of water that's used at the home, that's what ends up as sewer. Frankly, down here with the infiltration taking up a fair amount, you can get to a point where no more water can come in, and so whatever is coming from the house is kind of pushing some of that out and
then
taking it.
Okay. And then the other question, similarly, is as we go and repair pipes that are allowing for infiltration, is there any different materials, different pipe materials? What's being done to prevent this level of infiltration 50 years from now?
Yeah, it's a good question. A lot of it has to do with cost, but as far as technology, we've been using robots to go through and camera and identify and even sometimes do the repairs. They actually have robots with cutting arms and they can lay grout. So that has been used. That's probably been used for a good 20, 25 years now. I haven't seen anything beyond that. There have been these epoxy type socks that you can put through a pipeline that once they set, they essentially make a new pipeline. They use the old pipeline kind of as a form, as a host. Beyond those, I haven't really seen any other technologies.
Where you're
come
actually
through.
replacing a whole line, is the piping material the same?
No. A lot of the old pipe is clay pipe, which you can imagine cracks and breaks. So newer pipe is usually PVC. That's very, I guess, what do you call it, noble with respect to the sewer gases that come. And when we look at with the bigger pipe, you've got to use, say, ductile iron or concrete. Those sewer gases tend to eat that away. So the PVC has been very good, especially in neighborhoods too, because it's very quick, very light, easier for the contractors to put into place. But replacing a line, that's usually the last option because you're digging very deep. Here we're very flat, so you can imagine you can only run a line for so long, sloping it down before you get too deep. You need a pump station, and then you've got to force that through a pump to get to the treatment plant.
Thank you.
So yeah, very expensive. One of the other elements that is going to be key to the effort is public outreach. We want to address the residents concerned. We want to keep them engaged throughout the process and encourage their input so we can manage their expectations, as well as provide frequent updates when they're undergoing the construction in their neighborhood. And then lastly, looking at funding, we talked about House Bill 1123 to support the funding of this through the sewer revenues. That's in place now, has been signed by the governor a couple of months ago. With that, I'll turn it over to Eric Stantec.
Real quick, Vin, I know we had a discussion on the customer types that are able to, that are deemed to be central sewage system customers that are able to pay into this expansion. Are you guys going to address that, or is the interpretation of the state statute going to be discussed? Or do you need to discuss it at my request?
Eric has it in his presentation. He
Okay,
puts a few
all right.
slides in.
Thank you, Vin. Phil, good morning, commissioners. I'm Eric Grau, principal with Stantec. For the next 10 or so slides, we will be reviewing the results of this year's utility rate study. Well, most of the slides are going to be presented through the lens of how do we fund capital, specifically the septic to sewer program. First and foremost, our primary objective was to evaluate the sufficiency of today's water and sewer rates to fund the identified future requirements, financial and otherwise, of the utility system over 5 and 10-year periods. Then, if needed, to identify a plan, a 5-year plan of annual water and sewer rate adjustments that would fund the requirements of the system through that year 5 of the rate plan period. And so our 10-year forecast is focusing on the period of fiscal year 2026 today through 2035. So although it's a 30-year septic to sewer program, financial forecast only runs 10 years. And then we focus on an immediate 5-year period, so fiscal year 2027 through 2031, for our rate plan that we'll be seeking, or that we're recommending to the commission. If I could just briefly say something that would, any rate plan that's adopted can be overridden by a future commission. However, if, let's say, a 5-year plan were adopted and then it stopped, the 5 years concludes, at that point, then the commission's going to evaluate the plan again, and we'll have more information. We'll know, what costs are at that point. And so in doing so, we don't ever want to set rates too far out in the future because, to your point, we don't know. Costs could triple again between now and then. So we're really focusing on an immediate 5-year period with a look out at how does that set us up then for the next couple years? So with that said, that was our primary objective. And then we evaluated the impacts of septic to sewer and funding the septic to sewer exclusively through the sewer rates as is allowed per the recently passed into law or signed into law, House Bill 1123. Then within that context, we evaluated and will present the alternative results if we assumed accelerating the project timeline for septic to sewer. If we go from 30 years to 2010, so on. And what kind of impact would that have on the rates? And then we'll pause and spend a couple slides reviewing a new concept that we've developed specifically as a result of specific questions and action items that were that came about during our one-on-ones. So for the benefit of the larger group, walk through our thoughts on those concepts. And then finally, we'll wrap up with a brief comparison of local customer bills in the city's area. So it should be mentioned that at Stantec a couple years ago, we developed a 10-year financial forecasting model specifically for the city of Hollywood that replicates the financial dynamics of the utilities enterprise fund. We update this model annually with assistance from the utilities finance team. And so when we compare this year's utility rate study to the one that we completed last year, the single biggest driver of change is future capital and the proposed future capital spending plan. That's easily seen if we look at that bottom left chart that represents the CIP spending or the capital spending by year that is assumed in our rate studies, where the blue bars represent the level of capital that is assumed to be spent per this utility rate study, and the green represents last year's utility rate study. And you can see that the average annual capital spending has more than doubled from about $53 million per year in last year's study to about $120 million per year in this year's study. And fiscal year 28 is when you can see is really that first year of great variance. So we really
Is that
uh,
because we also added to the scope of work, realizing there's more to do, or it was just dollar for dollar for the same exact capital plan?
No, that's the result of the water and sewer master plan. So we received the water and sewer master plan, bring that in, and then that's...
Vin, are the
that's
plans different, or the plans are the same and just costing triple?
the capital.
Just in that slide, the current plan versus last plan? Or did you add, other things that are needed? I'm just...
The detailed master plans are, we settled upon about $150 million per year in CIP right now. Okay. The currently we spend about $75 million per year in CIP, and some of that, a good portion of that is supported by state revolving funds as well. So what we're looking at here is an increase from $75 million to about $150 million a year per year.
So
CIP.
doubling the work, not necessarily that the work is costing double.
Yeah.
It's just more work.
Just more work.
More work, okay.
Thank you. And so it should be noted that for our study, we've assumed that the funding of that capital program of about $1.2 billion by year 10 in future year dollars. So when we adjust for inflation, we're funding 50% of that project from available cash resources and the other 50% from long-term debt. So we're assuming 30-year revenue bonds. And so it's on the screen it's a screen capture of the dashboard from our financial model. I know there's a lot here, so I'll kind of walk through it. We've called out some of the key points. And so, let's see if I can get here we go. So this is our recommended rate plan. This assumes a 30-year timeline for the septic to sewer program and the funding of septic to sewer on the backs of the sewer rates exclusively. As mentioned, this is a 10-year look, but we're focused on the area that's surrounded by the orange border, so fiscal year 27 through 2031. It's important to note that these top two rows are inputs, and everything beneath that are the results. So on the first row, we are inputting annual water rate adjustments by year. The second row is the sewer rate adjustments assumed by year. And so for water, it's 9% per year, and for sewer, it's 12.5% per year, with the difference between the 9 and the 12.5, or 3.5%, reflecting reflecting what it costs to the sewer rates to fund the septic to sewer program. So it's going to be 3 to 3.5% per year, all else equal. And the blending of those two rates is going to result in this third row that shows us what the average, or that shows what the annual year-over-year increase to the system's total rate revenue would be. So that's like the blended rate increase. It's about 10.75% when we blend the 9 and the 12.5. Beyond that point, we're not seeking any guidance beyond 2031, but we can see that the rate plan does come down. That differential would maintain of about 3% between water and sewer for septic to sewer, but overall, all the other costs, our revenues have risen to a point where we're at a good spot at that point. Rates, all else equal, could come down. Now that the fourth row down represents our annual. Let me back up real quick. So the 10.75% for 5 years cumulatively by 2031 represents about a 71% increase compared to today's bill when we're looking at a typical single-family residential customer. Now, the next row represents our all-in debt coverage. So the utility must maintain or generate annually a level of net revenues that is sufficiently greater than the annual debt service requirements. Today, that annual coverage is about 2.86 times. So we just wanted to, ensure that whatever plans we came up with generated debt service coverage in that approximate neighborhood. So really, we targeted staying north of 2.75 times our annual debt service requirements. And so given the magnitude of debt service that this forecast contemplates, that's just a very important metric to keep in mind. The municipal rating agencies don't like to see coverage that is down and near the minimum requirements, and they don't like to see large fluctuations from year to year. And then the last point I'll make on this slide is with respect to the bottom right chart. So this is just tracking cash inflows versus outflows of the system, where outflows are the orange line and inflows are the black line. And this plan, if adopted by 2031, all else equal, would put this fund in a position of fiscal sustainability with lower future rate increases, where from that point forward, our cash inflows are exceeding, or at least, consistent with our inflows.
So real quick, during these 5 years, 27 to 31, where you have these large annual increases, have you looked at other neighboring cities?
Yes, and we have some slides on those. So for the 30-year septic to sewer program, it was a 3.5% adder to the sewer rate. This schedule, this is one of the ones Vin previewed earlier. We're looking at, so our recommended scenario is the bottom row. That's the 30 years. But as we move up the schedule, every row represents 5 years of acceleration to the septic to sewer program. If we look in this third column, that's our blended water sewer, total system rate increase. And for our recommended plan, that's about 10.75%. That includes that 3.5% adder for a cumulative increase of 71%. If we accelerate 5 years, that blended 10.75 becomes a blended 12.25% because our adder on sewer is increasing from 3.5% to 6%. So the cumulative combined bill would go up 85% over the 5 years. If we accelerate another 5 years, that blended rate is 14% because we have a 9.25% adder, and then our cumulative goes up. We're now doubling the bill in the 5 years. Again, 15 years would require a 17.5% blended rate or 15% adder to sewer. And in the most extreme, if we went with a 10-year plan, it would be 3 years of 9% for water and a 28.5% adder. So that'd be 37.5% for 3 years on sewer. Then 30 to 31 would be, I think it's 6.75 for water and 7.75 for sewer. It would be a 1% adder for those last 2 years. You can see cumulatively it's 176%.
So quick question.
Yes.
So, obviously looking at the numbers, the 30-year is, we understand that this was the less shocking route for our residents, right? I mean, is that the essence of it?
Yes.
Is spreading the pain over a longer time. But the real question is, how long can residents that are on septic stay on septic? I mean, is it realistic to think that the sea level rise and climate change and infiltration would even allow for a 30-year plan, or is this fiction?
Example, I'm on septic. We are in the process of having to put in a new septic tank because, I mean, this is 50 or 30 years out before we would. So that additional cost that it would cost for us to put in a new septic tank and the lines and do it in the right place so that in the future, the expansion is accommodating so that we don't have to do it again. That cost should be also incorporated into this and kind of a more deciding factor, because in addition to the increase,
I think that's
that burden is going to be there too.
I think it's a really great point, so that if it gets to a point where we have public meetings and residents that are on septic in particular have to say, like, what is better for me personally, to spread this over the city 30 years or to expedite it, do in 10 years and save myself the cost of that septic replacement. So, I mean, just to me, and those are all real life scenarios, but I just think scientifically, is 30 years even really worth talking about when the goal is to get rid of septic tanks because of the concerns we have with rising groundwater levels?
So I get questions
I
like,
think we all have questions also. So can we go in order maybe if we want to pause the presentation? And then we could all go through our laundry list of comments and questions, or are we going to finish up and then we could go in order?
We're on slide 57. There's slide 87 is the end. So Vin, given where we are with our questions, do you feel like some of them might be addressed by the rest of the presentation, or do you want us to pause?
I would say that that's the point of this slide, is to indicate to the commission that it's their prerogative whether they want a 30-year or a 15 or a 10-year program.
I mean, we could go back and
so
forth.
what I would suggest is, in the interest of time and to get through the material, to give us another 15 minutes uninterrupted so we can get through all the topics, and then we can dive into the rate and kind of, well, that's where we'll go into the consensus on where you are on the rates and whether you want a 10-year. I think we can.
I think that would be fair, because one of us can dominate the whole thing and we could be here until 4 or 5 in the afternoon and not get anything accomplished all day.
All right, I'm good with that.
Thank you. So now, take a step back for a second to address a concept or consideration that was that came out of a specific questions and action items during our one-on-ones that address specifically concerns about equity across customer classes. So the sewer, the rate plans that we're presenting for septic to sewer, it's putting, it's putting all of the cost for septic to sewer on the sewered customer. And you may have an unsewered customer who maybe it's 20 years until they are forced to connect to the system. So in trying to address that equity, we've come up with a concept for consideration. It has no bearing on the results of the presentation that we're going over today, nor does it affect our recommendations. But then the second consideration was what opportunities might there be to potentially offset the cost of on-site or on-property septic abandonment? And so the idea that we have started to bandy about is a monthly, what we're calling a sewer admin fee. It would be a monthly fee applicable to water-only accounts, so unsewered accounts. And this fee, we're recommending that it would start at $3.50 on year one of our rate plan. Each year thereafter, it'll escalate by the prevailing sewer rate increase. So under our recommended plan, that $3.50 would increase to by 12.5% each year. By 2031, the unsewered account is paying their water bill plus that $5.61 monthly. At that point, at the end of the 5-year period, we can see this my arrow. So the 71%, that's the 5-year cumulative rate increase for the combined water and sewer bill. Under this concept that we're playing around with, it'd be a 71% increase by fiscal year 2031. At that point in fiscal year 2032, when a new rate plan in theory is being considered, an analysis would be conducted again to determine what the fee might have to be to equal some level of equity at some point in the future. So at this point, if we wanted to achieve a similar 121% cumulative increase by 2035, that would mean upping the fee in 2032 to $10, increasing it at 7.5%. And then at that point, we would be in alignment again between the two different customer classes. And this might be more easily seen on this slide, where we're just comparing the monthly bill for a sewered account versus an unsewered account. Today, that single-family residential bill that uses 6.5 CCFs per month is paying just under $99 per month. The unsewered account paying just water, it's $33.25. By 2031, or year 5 of this plan, the combined bill is up to $169.59. There's our 71% cumulative change. The unsewered bill, which is the water bill plus that new sewer admin fee, would be $56.79, representing, again, a 71% cumulative increase versus what the bill is today. And so then we thought, this plan right here, we estimate would generate approximately $85 million in revenue by year 30 of the septic to sewer plan. That $85 million, or whatever that amount turns out to be, could that money be set aside in an escrow to potentially be used to offset or mitigate a lot of the property owner costs associated with on-property septic abandonment? And so if this is just a concept for consideration, following up on specific questions that were asked at our one-on-ones, if there's any validity to this concept, or you want to pursue it, whether we decide anything today or it's in the future, again, none of this impacts the results that we're presenting to you today. And then just to wrap up with some surveys, well, this one, in full transparency, the utility bill that a customer receives is both their water sewer bill plus their monthly stormwater fee. That fee is $22 a month. So we wanted to say, okay. Oh, yes. Yeah, this does not include sanitation. Good point. So this is just your stormwater and water and sewer. And stormwater recently was increased to $22 per month per equivalent dwelling unit. In 2031, it's scheduled to increase up to $48. That's also coincides with year 5 of our rate plan.
Does this include taxes and fees or just
No,
consumption? It's just consumption
just
and pure
consumption.
flat fees. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And again, to the point, it excludes sanitation. All right, and so we annually update a local survey of rates for your area and calculate what the typical single-family monthly bill would be. Based on the pool of agencies that we surveyed, Hollywood is currently right smack in the middle. That typical single-family residential bill is about $99, which is less than the average bill of $102.73. We know that a lot, if not all of those agencies are going to be increasing their rates into the future, and some of those entities have made that information public. And so we calculated based on that information, we put together a fiscal year 27 comparison. And based on that one, Hollywood is still positioned well. Pembroke Pines, their rates are going up the greater of, their index to go up at the greater of 3% or consumer price index. Dania Beach, bear with me for 1 second because I have these numbers. Dania Beach, they're going up 4.5%. Hollywood, that assumes the blended 10.75. Hollandale Beach is at 5.25%. Fort Lauderdale at a blended 6.7%. And yes, this would just be for 2027, for next year, for what's known. And then Davie, they increase at 5%, the greater of 5% or consumer price index. But Davie, I just got word this morning that my firm submitted a proposal to do a rate study for them starting this January. So Davie is looking at increasing their rates. I also found out that Coral Springs recently adopted a 29.5% increase for their water, with sewer at 3%. And they haven't yet adopted their future rate increases, but depending on some regulatory findings, they could be looking at double-digit increases for a little while here on the water side. Tamarack has adopted a 5-year plan from fiscal year 25 to 29 of water 15% every year and wastewater 5% every year. And then also it's out of the area, but Hillsborough County recently adopted 5% plus consumer price index plus a Tampa Bay water pass-through that they charge. And with that, I hand it back over to.
Thank you all for your patience. We had a little just flood issue here, but as the DPU, we took care of it. Don't worry about it. Good.
I apologize. I know there's a lot of dense material and so I'm going to put the unfortunate burden on Alec to get through his slides in like 5 minutes so that we can get on the conversation. But just so you know, just so you can see everything we've covered and you can catch what Alec's doing in the discussion.
And we're happy to follow up with you all individually if you have specific questions on this. So the important point on this slide is just looking at a cost per account. The estimated cost per account is $333,000. So this assumes septic to sewer costs remain the same and each utility count is equally assessed. So we asked that question previously. That is the cost for the city. $33,000, thank you. I'm pitch hitting on this slide, so. And then the estimated homeowner cost for the program, we'll actually break this down in a moment, but it's about $7,230 per account. So here, again, what we're talking about is that the homeowner responsibility is from the public right-of-way to the home itself, connecting the private sewer lateral. So that is the portion that they are responsible for. In addition, the abandonment of the septic tank. So looking at this a little bit differently, this is the costs that are paid to the city is a tapping administrative fee of $100, a reserve capacity charge of $2,130. This is for a single family home. That is payable over 5 years monthly per state law. So that is already kind of built in from a financial support. Obviously, that starts the monthly sewer fee and then any permit fees that the contractor may pay. Not paid to the city is the plumbing contractor. So this is the lateral installation and then the septic tank abandonment cost, which is a total of about $5,000. So this very quickly just is a proposed change in sewer use code. Ultimately, it just clarifies that the easiest way to see it is that this is their responsibilities from the public right-of-way to the city sewer main. Maintenance shall be the responsibility of the city. So ultimately, the homeowner's responsibility is from the public right-of-way to the property, through the property. This is a preliminary schedule for phase 1. Obviously, this may change depending on the commission direction today as well, but it looks at securing the debt funding and design in the late 2026 through 2027 permitting, contractor pre-qualification at the end of 2027, bid and award, and basically starting construction in 2028. So very quickly, the city of Hollywood has already been doing septic to sewer conversions. These are areas that have been done recently. We can, look at this map in detail. This is the important part for you all. Right now, only 24% of the residents who should be connected to sewer have connected. 24%. And so we'll talk.
Yeah, one of the question I have is, do we not have ordinances where they're supposed to connect by a certain time?
Yes, sir, and we're going to talk about that. It has not necessarily been enforced, and that is part of this process, is changing that for the city. So right now, property owners must connect within 90 days of availability, pay the tapping charge, the reserve capacity charge. Monthly base sewers fees charge is after 90 days, regardless of usage. And that 90-day mark is basically called a connection requirement letter. Failure to connect is a fine of $250 per day, with each day counting as a separate offense. And under state law, no less than 1 year prior to, you have to notify residents that it's coming. So there's a lot of notification that goes out there. Just a quick comparison to Fort Lauderdale. The reserve capacity C for Hollywood is higher than under Waterworks. Again, that was 2011. And then the failure for connection is $250 per day versus $1,000 for the city of Fort Lauderdale. I'm not going to go through this in detail for time, but one of the important parts is making it clear there's a very clear process from a permit perspective on how to connect. This is the important part. So from a notification requirement, we are proposing for previously completed projects, those residents have already been notified plenty of times in terms of their requirement to connect. We're also going to publish the upcoming, what we're calling phase 0 process for previously completed projects. They will know when, but they will receive what we're calling a project completion letter 180 days prior to their requirement to connect. The reason why is under your ordinance, once we send a connection requirement letter, they only have 90 days to connect. So to give a little bit additional time, an additional 3 months, we're going to say, hey, you're getting the project has been complete. In 90 days, you're going to receive a connection requirement letter, which is going to give you 90 days to connect from that point. That way, folks have really an official 6-month period to connect. However, they'll have notice over a year prior, especially for new projects. However, for completed projects, we're going to just make sure that we can kind of do this in a more succinct process. Although they're all going to receive social media and outreach and probably commission letters that this is coming as well. We also want to look at other notification pathways. Just very quickly, working with development services. So when folks pull permits and they haven't necessarily pulled a septic permit, they'll know. Work with realtors, so during the transaction process, they're aware. And then we're going to refine the cost estimates as we can. For the phase 0, which is completed projects, we're proposing a 2-year implementation process. And that's because there's about 1,000 people, 1,000 customers needing to connect. And we want to make sure that we don't just flood the market with 1,000 folks who have to connect now, given plumber availability and obviously the cost of construction right now. Public utilities will also work on a case-by-case basis with residents who are actively permitting. So we've broken this down. Group A, we will in late December this year, early January, they'll receive their project completion letter, and they'll have a connection requirement of July 2026. So that will start with Hollywood Hills and the State Road 7 Phase 2. Group B customers will target the second half of 2026 of Washington Park, State Road 7 and Johnson. First half of 2027 will be Dixie Highway, Adams Street, and State Road 7 Phase 1. And Royal Point Sienna will be the second half of 2027. And what this will also do is it will help public utilities refine the process as we move to connect another 17,000 customers to sewer. Very quickly, the city obligation will provide notices, give ample notice, and provide financing options. This is the current obligation for the reserve capacity fee. The customer has to abandon septic tank, connect to the sewer lateral, and obtain all permits. So a big question from the commission has been how, this is potentially not just a sewer fee cost and an increase in utility cost, there's also a construction cost to actually connect to sewer. The way that can work is the resident pays outright. There's some private financing options we'll talk about in a moment. There's city financing and potential grants. And then we looked at the option of the city actually installing laterals on private property. So homeowners can get a home equity line of credit. Their PACE financing has also been expanded to septic to sewer conversion. So those are private financing options if a resident should choose. The city has a wonderful septic to sewer conversion program already through the development department, which provides 5-year interest-free loans through a CDGB program for low and moderate income residents. A potential option to provide financing would be to expand that program with city funds instead of CDBG funds, providing more residents the opportunity to finance this if they need. So that program already exists and may be an easy pathway to look at additional financing. So for the city installation of private laterals, we estimate this will be another $100 to $130 million in cost. This is additional costs we have not talked about today. If you take that pathway, plus staff time, because remember, we're now coordinating 17,000 private property installations. So some things to consider are customers who've already connected and paid for those private connections, how they'll feel about that. Legal review, we have not had a detailed opportunity to sit down with the city attorney's office and look at that from an access, funds, and maintenance perspective. There are existing structures and landscaping that will have to be dealt with. There's a question about city and contractor liability for property damage. And with that, a contractor's willingness to work on behalf of the city on private property. There's also insurance issues and contractors being able to acquire insurance to do that. Septic tank abandonment will be a separate part of this. And we still have the issue of residents potentially not allowing approval to connect on their property. With that, I'm going to pass it back to Phil to go through some next steps.
Thank you, Alec. Real simple. The objectives of the whole program and workshop today is to get consensus. We want consensus to adopt the water and wastewater master plans, consensus to adopt the septic to sewer program as presented, consensus on the funding level and the fee structure, as well as consensus on enforcement of the existing sewer ordinance, compelling connection, or an alternative private lateral funding program.
Thank you, Phil. So appreciate everyone's patience. I know it's a lot of dense material to go through. Just wanted to point out we have a number of parking lot slides to address other topics, including the potential for in-house construction. So we'll just leave that open to the discussion period, and so we'll just bring up the topics.
I think it might help if you run through parking lot slides, because it sounds like it's something that the commissioners have already mentioned, whether it's me or others. So let's just run through those, and then we'll start with Commissioner Biederman and then Kaleri.
Okay, so real quick, we did look at what would a new division at the city look like. So if you were going to implement a DPU, Division of Utility Construction, we started with what's going to be behind the scenes. We already know what a pipeline crew looks like, but behind the scenes, it's going to be quite a bit of administrative work. So we're looking at a director of construction, assistant director, the engineers, and the safety element of the whole program, purchasing specialists. That's going to be very important. Construction, the way it moves. The people that have to procure are going to need the freedom to be able to move very quickly and sign off on high dollar amount items. We would also need to get that infrastructure, the equipment, the bulldozers and the backhoes purchased in advance, and then we can start looking at where do we find the crew and the land needed for staging for the projects. So quickly, just a a brief estimate of about a year to gear up with that administrative program and then hire the crews that would be needed, and about $2 million in equipment costs for the backhoes and such. Also, looking at the pipeline crew, that would be one element. So you've got a superintendent and a foreman, and then you've got to have an experienced crew. So looking at hiring them, the equipment that would be needed by them, we already mentioned, but there would also be a support crew needed to help that crew maintain progress. As well as there is some direct support that would be needed. So if you're going to consider a division like that, where does the division stop? Are you just going to install pipelines, or are you going to also do the surveying? Are you going to do the traffic control? Most contractors hire out for that. The trucking, the asphalt paving, that kind of thing. Where do you get the portalets, the cones, the Bob's barricades, all that kind of stuff? Pump stations, a whole nother element to a septic to sewer program. Very different than just pipelines. You're going to need carpenters for forming, concrete crews, finishing crews, that kind of thing, and a whole different set of mechanical crew with millwrights and other laborers. So another aspect of creating a new division. And as well, the support crews for those individuals as well. So just kind of a rough estimate for a pump station crew, we're looking at about a $40,000 a day cost, and then for a pipeline crew, about $15,000 a day. Yeah.
All right, well, are these all the parking lot slides?
Yes.
And I just do want to mention, obviously, we can pick and choose what we would want to do in-house if we decided, I'm just hypothetically, pump stations to go outside and the installation of the pipe and the neighborhood work in-house. There's different ways to slice where we want to do things in-house and where we think it's more advisable to go with contractors. But, I mean, obviously, you're looking at billions here, and even at $15,000 a day for the street crews, I did it times 365, we're talking $5 million. So, we're talking billions, and this is not amounting anywhere near the billions. So even if it's complicated and everything else, but we're talking about significant dollars here. So just opening it up. Obviously, we don't have the opportunity right now to make hard and fast decisions on this, because I think we need to study the cost versus the contractor cost and bring it down, I think, to an apples to apples type comparison. Like if we were to do it in-house in the way in which we thought it was advisable to do things in-house, what is our cost per household if we want to split it that way, or cost per mile, or cost per 100 feet or linear foot versus the market, and decide, do we take that leap, and how much savings can we potentially have? To me, it seems like because the market is so limited, my instinct, going into it is, let's do this in-house, and maybe not the pump stations, but let's do the neighborhood work in-house. I think we could do it a lot cheaper and not be at the risk of market contractor availability and cost. We have a situation with solid waste in Broward County where, we have very limited number of contractors or facilities that do that. And so as they drive costs up, we have no choice but to use them because we're relying on the market. So if we take our reliance away from it and build, Vin, some portion of this in-house, and in my mind is more toward the neighborhood crew. And, if we're looking at a $2 billion stormwater plan too, if we're already opening things up and we're putting in stormwater pipe and water main as well, maybe we can reduce a lot of cost in the stormwater side of the equation by having the neighborhood installation crew portion of it to be run through a city DCM-like operation. So I don't know if you want to address that. I mean, I don't know if you feel like you have your information down pat to where this doesn't require you to have more of a study into it. But there's also a matter of not, being at the risk and at the mercy of the market as the years go on as well, and not just, that we'd have to stand up a large department. We would, but even when you stand up a large department at these dollars per day, it's significantly less than the billions we're talking about, at least. So I'm not scared by 40,000 a day or 15,000 a day.
So I could expand on that. To stand up such an effort, here's how I would approach it. It's not an either-or effort. We can proceed with the program and the water and sewer rates as I indicated. And the first step I would do is try to do, I would approach the construction with pre-qualified contractors. So we would have a program where we reach out nationally to contractors, get them pre-qualified to work on the work. And once they're pre-qualified, then they have a commitment to come down and do the work. So if you're part of you're guaranteed work, so to speak, you're one of 5 qualified contractors and you're up in Oregon or Illinois, and now you're pre-qualified and you know there's work coming, that gives you the impetus to invest down here and start, put up an office, make your contacts with vendors, et cetera, and we can do that. While we're doing that, the other way I would develop an in-house capability is I would expand on actual utility operations crews with the actual equipment and slowly take over all our emergency repairs. Right now, when we have an emergency repair, whether it's a 12-inch water main on A1A or, God forbid, a 48-inch force main on Taft Street, we go out to contractors because we don't have trench boxes. We don't have some of the deep excavation equipment. We don't have the expertise. So I would expand our crews to be capable to handle all of those emergencies, and then given a degree of experience and capability with that, and then we can start taking over portions of the septic to sewer. So we can bid out projects where we can say to contractor X, you're going to do X street to Y street, utility is going to do Z street, and the lift stations are going to go to contractor, Alpha. And so that's how we could slowly transition and ramp up, over a 2 to 3 year period, which I think is what it takes. So rather than wait 2 to 3 years to start a greenfield construction company, we can kind of slowly take over the space and not delay the program.
And before I dish it to Commissioner Biederman, just to say that we're talking, at least in your plans, if you were to say go, we're not ready to start breaking ground until you do some initial work at the treatment plant, which is, I think, the phasing that you had indicated. And so we have some time to figure out the level of in-house construction while the initial years require, planning, design, permitting of certain aspects, correct?
Correct. The phase 1 basin is 2 area Boulevard Heights. I think that's, we label it UEO7 and UEO3. Sorry, we have the first 2 basins we're doing in phase 1, the first 5 years, are Boulevard Heights, which is identified, I think, as UEO7, and then we have UEO3 up to the north of that. And then most of the other activity in that first 5 years is treatment plant. So we can certainly, I would strive to do that qualified contractor bit for those first packages and see how that goes. And that'll give us plenty of time to ramp up our internal in-house forces to do our own in-house repairs out in the street, et cetera.
I'll continue where Vin just left off on UW07. Page 35. That was like one of the last, in the last plan, that was like one of the last projects because it was just done a water main replacement project. So I'm just curious how that was moved from what would have been the last on the last plan to one of the first on the new plan.
Simple. When Boulevard Heights was our perennial grant proposal project. It was if you want to come at it the other way around, it was the last project in what we were calling phase 0.
Okay.
So we just said, hey, this one's probably not going to get done under phase 0 under a grant. So let's move it first in the queue.
So phase 0 is
phase 0 is all the projects.
It's not UW07. It's that piece east of UW07.
So we just looked at
because UW07 is was projected for 2028 in the last phase. But what you're talking about is the mini piece that we're doing at 73rd Way.
not
Phase 0 is 73rd Way, no?
No, we look at a whole basin. So even if like under phase 0 we were doing a piece, wow, we looked at the whole thing. I believe there's a component of stormwater in there, that yellow. So the other thing is where you'll see yellow highlights on these different phase plans. So we incorporated all the stormwater interim CIP projects, so we're trying to hit everything all at once.
So some of east of UW07, some of that is, okay, so I see where there's a piece crossing 72nd Avenue of UW07. Because some of that over there is already septic, sewered. Anyway, now I'll start at the beginning. Thank you. Sometimes we see a first proposal and it goes back to rework. I appreciate some of the changes that were made from the initial conversation we had. Sometimes we hear the worst case scenario and then we're hoping for the best case scenario. So it did get better. It's not as good as I was hoping for or that any of us might have hoped for. I would like to move forward with a more accelerated plan and cut that 30 down to 10 or 15. And that being said, if we could still finance it over 30 years. Because this isn't pay-as-you-go projects where we have to raise money and pay for it. We're pay-as-you-go 50%. And then 50% financing over 30 is what I kept hearing.
That's correct. Well, to your point, we're not committed to, I mean, we in a vacuum, without feedback from the commission, thought 30 years would be the most, acceptable proposal. But as you can see, we worked out 25, 20, 15, and 10. So that's on the table. If this commission wants to do a 10-year program, they can do a 10-year program. Now, whether you have 30 years to pay off the 10-year program, I can bring up Eric Grau to explain why, how the overlap of the bonds and the construction work, and maybe he can explain in more detail.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, we would match up the terms of the borrowing to the lives of the assets, and these are long-lived assets. So any borrowing we would do would be, for that longer-term period, and not, we can accelerate the schedule. That has no bearing on how long we borrow for those funds. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, I get it. The GOB was 3 trenches. So this could be 10 trenches over 10 years as opposed to over 30 years, right?
Well, the other thing to keep in mind is that for accelerating the program, we have to raise rates up to a point sufficient to be able to carry that kind of level of capital funding. So we can accelerate the schedule, but that just would mean, all else equal, that the 3.5% adder for sewer would have to increase to something much greater.
But if we accelerate it, it's going to be that many more people paying into the system to pay
Yes.
off these 30-year bonds.
Yes, that's true, and we've accounted for that in our analysis.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. Under all
Yeah, but
scenarios.
why are we doing 50-50? Why can't we just do 100%?
Of debt funding or 100% cash?
100% debt funding.
Yeah, I think it gets to a point of coverage. We looked at if it was a 40-60 split, so 60% debt service could reduce the increases by 1% per year. But then too much more above that, and we start getting into the problem of debt service coverage, in that we would have to raise rates that much more just to make sure.
But these are
that-
all revenue bonds, right?
Yes.
So the more conversions we do, the more revenue there is to pay more bonds.
Yes.
Okay. That's a good answer. And Phil, has any, in calculating the phases or the priority areas, has any consider, I know Commissioner Shuham brought it up earlier, but I don't know that we got a complete answer out of it. The projections of the water tables rising, has that been considered as part of where the phases are going? Because, I mean, if we wait 30 years for certain areas, the water tables might make those septic tanks inoperable, and then we're going to have, I won't be here, I'll be dead by then, but we're going to have residents that can't use their showers and toilets because the groundwater, the septic tanks aren't draining anywhere, and that's our failure because we didn't provide sewer ahead of time.
Right. So the effort that we talked about in 2020, if you recall, that's where we looked at those kind of metrics. right? And what we found in that effort, and I can send that to you again if you all don't have it, from recollection, there was one basin that looked like it might be compromised today. And then by the end of the program, which I think at that time we were looking at an estimate of 10 years, there was potentially one other basin that looked like the groundwater elevation would have been high enough to compromise their drain field.
So we're not expecting the groundwater levels to
You know,
get higher in the amount of time in the 30 years?
yeah, correct. So what
Okay.
we used was the county's estimate. The county estimates the groundwater elevation over time, and that's what we used in that project, that 2020 effort.
Okay. So in areas like UW07, when they did a water main replacement project, they abandoned the rear yard alleys, the rear yard utility easements, and moved the meters to the front and under the streets. As part of that project, the city connected from the water meter in a sidewalk all the way to pressurize the house, which is the lateral when it's considered. I mean, is water main considered a lateral also, or it's just in septic in sewer language, it's a lateral?
Yeah, in sewer language, we use lateral, so I wouldn't want to.
Okay. So if we could do it for that, then whatever slide it was, I think we could do it for the sewer, especially in areas where we are moving that water main to the front house when areas that there's no alleys. And I'm not looking for the city to absorb that $100 million cost that was on slide 84. I think that could be an assessment. So that residents are still paying for that lateral and reserve capacity fee and, well, I mean, that they have to pay for anyway. But we could do an assessment for that lateral. And when we're buying it in bulk and we're having the same contractor that's laying the pipe in the ground and connecting the houses, I think the cost is going to be cheaper then. And, you know, I'm not an expert like some of my colleagues up here when it comes to construction costs, but I would think that scaled, it would be cheaper for us to have the same contractor that's putting the pipe in the ground and connect the house than it is for a homeowner to hire John Doe plumber to dig his own trenches and all that.
So at scale, I would agree with you. If you're going to have a greater quantity, you can probably bring the price down. But from an engineering standpoint, I would warn a little bit about the difference between a water line that's going to the house, which is probably going to be at a half an inch or maybe 3/4 of an inch, versus a sewer lateral where if that septic tank is in the back of the house, you're talking about now disconnecting it from there and connecting that lateral. We're talking about probably a 6-inch lateral. It's got to flow by gravity. So you're looking at sloping that to get it down to where the sewer system is versus a pressurized line for the water where you can have that, a foot below grade.
But theoretically, the master contractor that's putting the pipe in the ground is going to subcontract out to plumbers anyway and get the better price than an individual homeowner. And then we get that cost estimate and we do a property assessment. So
All of it's possible.
we're taking care of that.
All of it's possible to do. It's just
All right. So that's my thought on that particular issue.
I just wanted one other thing, Ray, especially looking at older homes in Hollywood. Do remember that they could have cast iron pipes as well. And so for a lot of homeowners that are connecting, this is also an opportunity to look at converting those to PVC.
That's $33,000 for an average size house.
It depends on how much is needed, but I just caution also that once you start opening things up and start looking, there's a lot of liability in, okay, hey, if now their plumbing doesn't work.
Good
I'm
point.
just letting you know that you're with 17,000 individual connections, that's 17,000 individual permits as well, because you're on private property.
Good
It's
point.
just a very onerous process for the
Good
city.
point. I mean, I have a resident that just had their house repiped and it was $33,000 to tunnel under their house. And And it was a small house, like 1,400 square feet or something. Slide 33. We sleeved ours, and it was still 10 grand. All right, so I'm not looking to insult anybody, but information on this slide is just not necessarily accurate information, and I toned down the words I wrote. The water mains was a major priority as part of the 2020 plan and the 2018 plan. Based on the life of water mains and and redoing those water mains, that was part of the priority on where we're putting sewer. So I just wanted to point out that that has to be one of the priorities also when determining phases, where we have those old water mains that need to be replaced. And that's also scalable because you're mobilizing for one time for 3 things: fresh water, sewer water, storm drainage. I talked about page 35 already. Let's go to page 60. And I think I may have brought this up in our one-on-ones, but it was misinterpreted what I was looking for, if this is what was created from my discussion. What is the benefit, and I don't think that this was clarified, what's the benefit of a non-sewer person paying $350 for the luxury of having to have their septic tank pumped every few years and having to replace their drain field every 15 years, considering that some people are going to be waiting 30 years to connect to the sewer? When I brought up a fee, it was based on having some kind of grant to replace drain fields or septic tanks, not just to charge residents for the pleasure of living in Hollywood and having to have a failure septic tank.
I think the genesis of that came from another commissioner
Okay.
that had brought up spreading the cost out more versus just having the existing sewer customers fund all of the new sewer customers.
And what's the benefit to the resident that's paying that $350? Well, I mean, what's the return on their $350? Nothing?
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah, but
The return is that we have an expanded system that gets expanded quicker, and that everybody is paying a little
yeah,
bit
but
toward
you're
that.
you're charging somebody $350 or $561 or $10 to pay for a future sewer system that they might be dead or moved by then.
So it's a matter of
So,
splitting
but
the
they're
cost of
paying for
infrastructure.
no benefit. There's no benefit to them, especially if they're going to sell their house for less money because we don't have sewer in that area. So I would be totally opposed to this unless we're giving them some kind of benefit, like paying for their new drain field because we are incapable of providing sanitary sewer to their area.
On the flip side, real quick, we went from, before we changed the state law, we went from thinking we could only charge the people that were newly connecting for the expansion. Now,
Because they didn't pay for those connections when it was done.
right, but now with the new state law, apparently we can charge, they're saying, the existing customers only.
Because they never paid for it in the first
Existing
place.
customers. So now you have existing customers that are paying to expand the entire system, and for 20 years, people still being on, say, arguably on septic tank that are not paying for it. So we're charging people that are already on sewer for all the sewer expansion, and for 20 years, 17,000 until we get to them, are not paying anything. I would have thought that the state law allowed us to charge all 40,000 customers the same, lower amount for everybody. Everybody pays, and eventually the whole city's on it. And the interpretation was suddenly that we can only charge the existing customers. So I was let down from the result of the new state law language, unfortunately. I thought always it was going to be the whole 40,000 customers can start paying.
So let's charge them $20 a month, and that is $240 a year. And then every 3 years, we could pay the $500 to pump their septic system.
Well, not everybody.
Because that's the benefit.
Not everybody pumps their septic system every year. It depends how you use it. And a lot of people rent their houses, and that's where the problem is. Most of the people that own their houses have an idea of what to put in the toilet and what not to put in the toilet. And so it has a different effect on.
Yeah, but a smart commissioner told me if you dump a gallon of milk down your sink every couple of months, it lets your septic system.
It all depends on
longer.
the microbial system and the septic system works, which is with yeast. Nonetheless, you can't put everybody on the same boat, because the individuals that now you want to charge $350 for something that they're not getting any benefit, whenever they actually hook up, which could be 10 or 15 years, they're going to be paying the higher rate, not the lower rate that everybody else that we're charging for. So I think the state law took that into account, that you actually charging the people that benefited from it in paying for all the update that it's taking place. The people that are actually not paying at this point, whenever they do hook up, they will go to the higher rate, which means that they will be paying retroactively everything that everybody else has been paying.
Yeah.
It balances out. So I agree with you regarding the $350 that we may not want to charge because the state law doesn't allow it. And those people are just seem to be in a place that their property, for one reason, geographically doesn't have the water infiltration that it's taken place, and therefore their septic tank can be there for a longer period of time. It's up to them how they maintain it. A lot of people that own their property, they know how to take care of their septic system. The people that are renting don't really care, and that's where the problem comes up.
Well, they just have to follow your advice.
Yes, sir. Keep going. It's 12:05 and
Two final questions. One is, and just a question and a comment. When this, and if archives can find this information, when I was told, I wasn't here at the time, but I was told that when Boulevard Heights and Driftwood was annexed into the city, they were promised sewer as part of annexing in. And this is what keeps coming to me for the last 12 years, 13 years, from residents in Driftwood and Boulevard Heights. Final question, how is reserve capacity? I think everybody wants to hear this. How is reserve capacity calculated based on the fact that Fort Lauderdale only charges $1,000 and we're charging $2,130?
So the reserve capacity is based on the cost at the plant. The last time you did an expansion of that plant, back in 2002, you expanded from, I believe it was 45 to 55.5. That cost was distributed among the large users based on what they were requesting in additional capacity. That's how the plant was expanded. We came up with the number based on what all of the large users said they felt they needed for the future. And then the cost of the overall construction was split based on that percentage.
So Fort Lauderdale charges $1,000. Their calculation was just different?
Well, if you're going to look at that, I don't know how Fort Lauderdale came up with their tapping charge, that $1,000 fee. The city of Hollywood, that's been in the city code for quite some time. I'm not sure how that was come up with either.
So in the other cities that use our South wastewater
region?
treatment plant,
Right.
Southwest, South, whatever it's called, SW, whatever. Do they charge a reserve capacity fee also?
I would assume they do, because
But we don't know what that is.
We can look into that, but
I mean,
yeah,
those
they-
numbers are just as important as what Fort Lauderdale's charging because they're using our system. Right?
They are, but they paid for that expansion in the plant. That, as a collective, that it was paid for by all of the large users.
All right, thank you. Nothing further. I appreciate the changes that were made.
So we're going to look to end this workshop at the maximum by 12:30, and obviously the city manager and all of us understand that we're not going to get through all of the issues here and now. There's still some thinking that needs to be put into this and some analysis, and I know maybe some of us might need some additional one-on-ones with utilities. So to be continued, but let's keep going and get through it. Commissioner Clary?
So lightning round, this is definitely not my wheelhouse, except for I think all of us can agree quality of life is the most important. Sorry. So issues that were brought up, infiltration is very concerning, especially when we're expanding it over a 30-year period. To me, is just absurd. I think we're looking at it as a silo, and I know when I had my one-on-ones with Vin, I talked about, less is more at sometimes, and we have stormwater master plan where we're going to have disruption, and then we're having sewer. To me, I feel that they need to work hand in hand. We talk about hot spots in the area, our stormwater master plan areas that are a big concern, and like kind of have like an overlay of maps and see where those hotspots are and focus those primary resources towards sewer improvement areas, so that the disruption itself is far less. You're not tearing up a road and then tearing up a road more. I do like the fact about hiring our own staff and bringing it in-house. One, it kind of gives us a little bit more control. It also promotes the need for employment, which I think we would be checking the box off of providing that. So that is good stewards on our part. In addition to that, trade school that teaches this type of information. Maybe that's a way for us. We talk about bringing in universities. Maybe we could bring in a trade school, relocate families to the area, workforce housing, make it a whole combined effort to really set the bar where it could address the situations. The price increase to me is very concerning, but it's a price increase that's needed. But to extend it over the 30 years, I would rather just take the punches now and get it over and done with than be a continual beating of the horse for however many years. Bonds and grants obviously are opportunities that we haven't looked into. And I think that really here's an opportunity for us to make great strides and history. There's a lot of these questions that are on the board that we are elected to make, but we have to have public input. Granted, we have in 2026 an election cycle coming. If we can come up with some type of agreement, kind of pushes us, but get it on the ballot so that our residents can vote for these increases, vote for the timeframes that we're suggesting, like an overall opportunity for our inputs for our residents to really give their input, because they're the ones ultimately that are going to be paying the prices. So to me, I think this gives us a really great opportunity to kind of steer our city in the direction instead of us trying to make those really hard decisions that are going to ultimately be life-changing for some, and they're not going to be able to afford to live in the city in the first place with these increases. And then come up with a trendy name, because this is a huge undertaking, massive maintenance, mega grind, the big dig, following along but make it something where everybody's a part of and that it's exciting, because we're going to be making environmental changes that are benefiting our city overall. A deep dive, you can come up with a lot of different ones. But the siloing, I think, is the wrong approach. I would like to see a combined effort of how we can address it. And the 24% on page 73 just really bothers me. City manager, this has to be addressed, because we've put in the infrastructure. They need to step up. It is just unacceptable when it comes time to move my septic tank. And here's the question I get from every one of my residents. When are we getting sewer? And this has been an ongoing thing, and I hate to say the same, like a broken record, but I've been here for 14 years almost. It's the same question. When is our area getting septic? When are we getting it? We've always said, it'll be coming soon, within the next 5 years. Oh, now the next 30 years. So I feel terrible as a commissioner, because I've told some of my residents, hold off. Don't move your septic tank yet. Don't put a new one in. It's coming. And now that's not happening.
Yeah.
So I'm a little off edge on it, but now I know what direction to go in. But I would encourage my colleagues to really consider ballot questions and moving it, expediting and let the public.
Commissioner, and to all, to be clear for the record, couldn't agree with you more. If it wasn't enforced for the connection when available in the past, it is now.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I think that that's a really great idea about putting an extra treatment plant somewhere west, because you see those numbers going up. That's very alarming to me. And I think that we will regret not looking into placing another area possibly further out west, just to take into consideration. And we'll talk about foreclosure homes, which I think can also be brought into the mix here as far as staging sites and areas that we can use that will help lessen our costs as well with this project. But let's go. I'm ready to move it fast and forward.
Sorry, real quick, just to keep in mind that even though they don't connect, they're still getting billed as of 90 days.
Yes.
So we're collecting whether we're treating them or not. We are still collecting them.
Yeah, but come on.
It's a environmental issue, but they're still paying.
We're all for one, one for all.
Yeah.
There you go.
Real quick on the two commissioners that spoke, in terms of the timeline, do you have any, are you prepared to make a sort of an impression of your feelings on the 10-year versus the 30 versus the 15? I mean,
I would say 15 or less.
Okay, Kevin?
Absolutely. 10.
10, 15 or less. All right, so maybe we can give you guys some picture, at least coming out of this, and then the next steps will be geared toward that timeline.
Mayor,
Peter,
real
yes.
quick, we could say 10, but
Right.
or a construction company, I mean, what are the likeliness that we're going to be able to do construction in 10 years, even if we were to do it?
Yeah.
It's going to take
Well,
4
that
years
should be
just
part
to
of
hire
the-
our own.
And it'll depend on how well we manage it inside or outside too.
Are you going to?
Peter, go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you, Mayor.
Well, it is with DCM.
Well, I know that we're trying to get this thing done in 15 minutes, so I just have 4 bullet points. I like the idea of bringing the crews in-house for construction. I like giving Vin the ability to do so. If we try to, and this I'll go to my next point, if we try to bring the timeline within 10 or 15 years, he may not have enough time to get all of that in place. It all depends how big we want the department to be, how quickly we want it to do it, and how much money we do it. Some of the equipment costs, we can purchase it or we can lease it in order to try to minimize the outlay when it comes to that. I also do not agree with trying to do the connectivity from the septic tank to the system, because that's when you get into trouble regarding liability in people's backyard and what have you. They should, if we have a set of plumbers that have probably been pre-approved by the city for them to be able to use with a set price per lineal feet, that would probably be helpful for the homeowners, and then we can streamline making sure that those individuals have the insurance and the proper expertise to do the
A lot
job.
of good small business work too.
Correct, but I don't think that we should be in that particular business, and we should move ahead immediately, having those people that are not connected to the system and have the ability to do so, because even though we may be charging them, which I'm not 100% sure that we're charging them, I don't believe that we are charging them for the sewer consumption, because they're not. But we're missing out on the impact fees when it comes to the reserve capacity. So I think immediately we should be notifying those people and letting them know. Some of the commercial individuals have reached out to me and says, I don't have a restroom, I only have one restroom, and the reserve capacity impact fees is astronomical. I told them, bring that to my attention, send me an email. I have not received those emails. And if you don't have a consumption use when it comes to that, because you only have one restroom and you have a big warehouse, some of the places along Dixie Highway were mostly warehouses that were not anything other than that, then we will work on reducing you in
I think we
consumption.
should direct staff to work on that.
To work on
immediately,
something
because
like
it
that,
should
because
be
if they
fair.
have a 1 inch or 2 inch and they only need a 3/4 inch inlay, then their impact fees is less. So that's something that needs to be done. But I think those people need to be brought into the system ASAP. And if not, charge them accordingly, as Commissioner Biederman said, which I don't believe that we're charging them right now.
Just a few things, also concerned with the 24% hookup, but, looking at our ordinance, first of all, I've spoken to lots of people that have septic that don't want to get rid of their septic. So when you're dealing with a cost burden, population like we are in Broward County, have 50% of our cost burden, and you're telling them you have a septic, it's working fine, now you have to pay $7,200 to do this. probably most of the people that aren't doing it because they don't want to do it. I had a septic when I lived in Playland Estates. I would, I wouldn't want to do it unless I understand the effects on the environment and but they don't, but they also, if your credit cards are maxed out and you're barely paying your bills, you don't want to look at this if your toilets are flushing, So I'm not crazy about what our ordinance is as far as the penalties. $250 a day and 30 days in jail. Like, yeah, so, no, but what's that? Fort Lauderdale's ordinance is, Fort Lauderdale's ordinance is just a one-time $1,000. What do you mean? No. I'm talking about the penalty for not connecting. I think we should just do like a one-time lien or something. I don't think if we could maybe change that, in my opinion. I don't know why it needs to be 30 days in
What we
jail.
are really missing out on in that regard is really the reserve capacity fee. If they already are being charged the sewer fee, what we're missing out is the reserve capacity fee. And maybe that is the assessment is, hey, you're going to have to pay this fee and equal if you don't connect. But obviously we'd want people to connect. But, I don't think any one of us want to do $250 a day.
Real
That's
quick, I would like
being
to know if
ridiculous.
we could add the reserve capacity fee to the annual assessment that we do for property maintenance.
Like as a nuisance. Okay.
Yeah. Yep. I'll be quick. Yeah. And also, just from my math, it seems like since 2008, do the job, right? But cost of goods and services have probably gone up, 100% since 2018? And really, so I'm really for seeing how much of this we can do in-house. Hiring, if we can make it so it goes up 300% instead of 400%, what are we saving? $600 million? And we could afford to pay for the hookups so that people don't get burdened with that $7,200 cost. Something to think of, but I'm all for bringing it to do in-house as much as we can.
Vice Mayor.
Thank you. I'll try to be brief. What is the benefit? We live in a city. I mean, where I was born in Cuba, there was no running water and there was no toilet to flush. So the benefit to everyone in the city of Hollywood is that you get to live in a city with modern day lifestyle. So whether you currently have sewer or septic, I had never heard of a septic system when I bought my house because I came from Chicago where it was a given. Everybody had sewer. So we're a big city now. In terms of prioritizing, I thought that the reason that we were doing the first phase of 5 years in those specific places was in part because we were kind of trying to go to the places that were more the hot spots that Commissioner Kalari mentioned. And so when I talk to residents in my district who have called me many times, many people, I have to replace the drain field. Am I going to be getting sewer soon? I say, replace your drain field because the city's not coming to us for a while because there's people in the city of Hollywood who have much more serious problems than we do because we generally are in good shape in my district. Not everywhere, mind you, in my district, but generally speaking, better than other parts of the city. So I've been telling people, go ahead and spend the money. I spent the money on replacing my drain field because of that. So I'm thinking that no matter what the final plan ends up being, you're going to focus on the areas that are in more urgent need first. But I am, and I want to say that if we're going to put something on the ballot, regardless, I've been kind of badgering poor Vin about this, is like, we need to really work on our education campaign. I have to commend you guys for the language and the images that you used in your presentation, that you didn't assume anything about people understanding this language and you really broke it down. There's still stuff that I wrote down like, what does that mean? But if we need to do such a good job of educating everybody about this because they do not understand at this point what any of this stuff means and why they should invest in it and what the benefit is to them is something that people don't at this point understand. So I think before we go there, we got to do a lot of work in educating. I agree with the idea about at least some portion of the work being brought in-house. I love what Commissioner Kalari said about being able to train our people locally to have this kind of specialized skill, because if all our people know how to do is service jobs, they're never going to be able to make enough to live here. We need to develop other sources of income for our people, because they won't be able to stay. I'm very concerned about us accelerating the rate at which we do this, because it's not just this that people are cross-burdened with. If you think about the housing, the transportation, the insurance, all of that, I don't know how I'm going to go out to the civic associations and tell them that we're talking about tripling their water bill. And really get them to be all right with that. Like, they're going to throw tomatoes at me. So I guess those were the big points. Thank you, everybody.
Commissioner Shua?
I'm just going to throw a question out there. I know that in, I think, Fort Lauderdale, they did a P3 for their for their water system. Have there been any examples nationwide of P3s of companies coming in and doing wastewater systems?
Have not seen that. I can look around to that. We have seen design build for that, but not P3s.
Okay. And then I guess, Damaris, just a thought. This is for way down the road, is like a quasi-public entity, a separate entity from the city. I don't want to use the CRA as an example, but you could create an entity specifically for this purpose that would function in a governmental sense, but would be separate and distinct from the city. I'm talking about the entity.
So, all right, everyone. Well, thank you all for the presentation. I think if you probably are trying to gather consensus from all of our perspective, it's probably fair to say that we want this executed probably as quick as feasible. So when you're looking at 10 to 30 years, even though there's sensitivity to cost, I think we'd rather get it done. And so when you consider that we need to align this with the underground work that the stormwater program calls for, I don't know yet, Vin, if you have it ready or you need to work on the idea that if we were to want to implement this as quick as practically possible, considering all the underground work, stormwater, water main, and septic to sewer conversions, what would that time horizon look like? So for our next meeting, say, okay, if you wanted to do it, realistically as quick as you can, I need 17 years because I've aligned stormwater work and the financing of the stormwater master plan and the ability to roll that out and design and permit and build, together with septic to sewer, together with water main. Come back to us with what that window of years you think could be as accelerated as can be, even though you said you can do this in 10. Well, if you layer that with stormwater, water main, and everything, could it really all be 10 and we move up our stormwater master plan from 20 to 10? That's what, you don't have to answer that right now. So but I want to know what, when you come back to us, what the real alignment of all those underground works could be if we're digging once and doing all the work in the areas that need, 3 types of utilities in that trench. Obviously, looking at rate structure, flat fees, and assessments as possible ways to pay for this based on that timetable of doing all that at once. And maybe this is a blend of stormwater master plan and septic to sewer all at once, and not necessarily looking at them as 2 separate things, because now we're combining work once we open the patient for surgery, right? So you seem like you want to say something. Sorry. And maybe it's already done, but go ahead.
Yes. First of all, I know it's hard to see in the detail in the maps up on the screen, but we've already overlaid the stormwater master plan interim projects. That was the first $75 million over 5 years. So those are already integrated into all the projects, to Commissioner Clary's point. Secondly, if the general consensus from the commission workshop today is that 15 years is okay, we can come back with a resolution for 15 years, have that all overlaid and integrated with the stormwater master plan, and have a conceptual plan for standing up in the House body.
And I will just say with that, with what Commissioner Biederman mentioned in terms of the financing survives the 15-year work site, I mean, the idea of borrowing more and not having the interim years be so high in terms of the impact on monthly cost from the residents, if however we can balance that as sensibly as can be, realizing that we all pay an interest rate when we borrow versus out of pocket for the resident, we have to find that fine line, whether it's 50-50 or something different.
I'm sorry, George.
Yeah,
I'm
George.
sorry, Mayor. Yeah, this is literally like eating the proverbial elephant. It's a lot to bite off and chew, right? A lot of pieces, a lot of moving parts. So as we bring back to you, and it may be necessary to have a second workshop because we appreciate the focus and the consensus today, but now there's a lot to drill down into and narrow and bring back. I don't want to do this in isolated pieces because it really isn't. It's all integrated into a master program, and we'll digest that now and then give you some feedback on how we come back in those pieces too. But we've got the general sense of where to narrow, though.
I definitely think that we do need another workshop, and I don't think that 2.5 hours is enough time to be able to digest all of this information and give you something that you can get the answers that we need. But I'm cautioned when it comes to accelerating the amount of money that the residents are going to have to pay on a monthly basis. We need to have a long-term financial process for this. If we're going to finance for 30 years, let's see what we can do. We can let them know this is going to be a 15, 20-year project. We're going to finance for 30 years. The question is, what's going to happen after those 30 years of financing? Are those rates are going to come down because if we have already spent the capital funds to be able to do the project, we've already paid for the financing. What is the long-term view for the department and from the city to bring back down those costs after we've already paid for that? We haven't seen that, but I would love to be able to see that in a workshop that we will do, and maybe we have a little more time in order to do so.
Yep. All right. Well, I think we made some headway today and a lot to digest here, and we'll continue the conversation. Thank you all. Meeting's adjourned.